Among the backlashes to Rachel Reeves' first budget, it's been the reaction from farmers that has proved the most vociferous. Their beef, no pun intended, was a move by Reeves to reduce the tax breaks farmers enjoy when it comes to inheritance. Now, to my mind, that policy was entirely reasonable. Removing tax breaks is generally a good thing. But farmers are really very annoyed. And according to The Telegraph, some rebel farmers have threatened port and supermarket disruption. Presumably, food blockades aren't really something Labour would welcome in their first few months in office. But unfortunately for the government, a former Labour advisor has decided to add fuel to the proverbial fire.
I'm personally in favour of doing to farmers want to go on the streets, we can do to them what Margaret Thatcher did to the miners.
So just to be clear, John, you would, beat them up?
No, close them. I mean, this is an industry we could do without.
So, okay, all right, so this got weird. So you would do to farmers what Margaret Thatcher did to miners, which was, she used very heavy-handed police tactics, followed by what? Putting them out of business.
If people are so upset that they want to go on the streets and spray slurry on them, then we don't need the small farmers.
Right. Okay, John, I'm not sure that's a particular... You were, just to clarify, you were a former Labour special advisor, possibly emphasis on the word former there.
Jesus. So Keir Starmer has disowned those comments, very unsurprisingly, given how pissed off the farmers are already, telling a GB News journalist that he totally disagrees with what John McTernan said in that clip. Mike, will Labour be begging McTernan to turn down any future interview invitations?
Absolutely. That was a car crash. I mean, whatever your stance on this is, and I don't think actually Labour's policy is bad at all on this. I mean, I'm happy to provide evidence that kind of maybe pushes back against this slightly. I haven't got a crystallized view or anything, but generally speaking, I kind of lean on the side of this is not an unreasonable policy, but it doesn't mean you kind of smugly go onto GB News and say, yeah, but essentially saying we almost want to punish these farmers. It's kind of the tone that Starmer wouldn't want is this idea of like we're punishing these people, we're punishing small businesses, and it just comes across as very, very malicious. And we spoke earlier, and I ultimately think a lot of the interventions by Blairites in our politics today, whenever they try and do the bidding of Starmer, they often go on. Tony Blair will be wheeled out at some point before Christmas to say something again, I'm sure. It'd be something about the culture wars or something like Starmer needs to do this or whatever. All these Blairites get wheeled out as opportunities, and they always say really daft things. They just genuinely say really daft things. And look, these are people who often frame themselves as savvy political operators, so smart, so bright, the best of the best. These are the adults. And we have the adults behaving like children on GB News, saying silly things that ultimately reflect quite poorly on the Labour Party and Keir Starmer. So I think Keir Starmer needs to talk to the adults and let them know that they actually need to behave like adults rather than children and stop saying silly things. Because to say we don't need farmers, I mean, whatever your position on the policy, again, is an obscene thing to say. And he said it was such smugness. So yeah, adults, please behave like adults. Stop being children. The Blairites aren't helping anyone.
That interview seemed like a bit of a deliberate headline grabber to me. But also, just on the topic of small farms, I mean, one of the reasons I think for getting rid of that tax break was to stop rich people from buying up farms as a way of passing down an inheritance or avoiding tax on their inheritance. But of course, a way of making it up to farmers would be to, for example, provide subsidies for productive smaller farms. And I don't know what you think about small farms. I don't have a lot of views, but just like doing a bit of research this afternoon, I mean, it seems to me there are very good arguments for biodiversity. For example, that small farms are good for biodiversity of animals and wild plants, but also for crops. Big corporate farms tend to just grow a small number of strains which are like highly successful, whereas food security requires that we maintain a wide diversity of crops that we grow. It's also the case that apparently on a well-run small farm, per hectare, it can be more productive than the large farms, although it is more labour intensive. So there do seem arguments to keep small farms going, so not just move over to a kind of corporate megalopoly producing our food for our supermarkets.